The truth is that many of us have never given our own safety a significant thought when it came to running. We run during the day and in well-populated areas, doing enough to feel safe. But as more and more women are murdered while running, the grim truth that the next one could be one of us stares back at us in the mirror. And we have to face the facts. We are not safe while doing something we love. The thing that brings us joy, confidence, and a sense of worth could be the very thing that gets us murdered or missing. I'm going to tell you these stories because every runner matters. Every single woman who laced up her shoes and didn't come back alive deserves to have her story told. And to every woman still heading out the door, taking extra precautions to try to ensure she comes home, I see you. I am you. This is Girl Gone Running, a Tragedy with a View series about murdered and missing runners. I am your host, Kayla. Welcome back. There is something special about solving cases. There is no doubt about it. But solving a case that has gone cold, a case with so many questions and so few answers, bringing home the explanation to the family lifts a weight that no one understands how bearable it is. Like breathing life back into others, the hope that even after decades, answers will come. And that is exactly what happened for Janice's family. 31-year-old Janice Christensen was born in Euclid and then moved to the Cuyahoga Falls area for 7 years with her husband, Ken. She worked at the Cuyahoga Falls General Hospital and was close to her parents and 4 siblings. On August 10, 1987, at about 9:30 a.m., Janice set out for a run after driving her 1983 orange Toyota Torolla to the Metro Bike Path in Hudson Township in Ohio near Cleveland. The Metro Bike Path is part of a larger network that is known as the Bike Path and Hike Trail, and it is managed by Summit Metro Parks. The path began to be developed in the late 70s, which created pathways in northeastern Ohio to be able to connect communities and other parks. There have since been expansions and improvements which have led to the trail totaling 33.5 miles or 54 kilometers. The trail will lead you through rolling prairies, beautiful riverfronts, lush forests, and open meadows that bloom with a range of flowers in the spring. This trail is very well managed, and it is even kept free of snow in the winter months, and it also connects to the Cuyahoga Valley National Park. The trail follows the course of the old Akron, Bedford, and Cleveland Railroad, and while it was not completed yet in 1987, sections were available for use. And Janice fully intended to get her use in. She often came to these trails to get her runs in and have some exercise and enjoy the beautiful weather that Ohio summers are known for. But as this hot August morning turned into afternoon and then into evening, Janice's husband Ken began to get more and more worried. When she had not returned as the sun began to set, Ken called the police and reported Janice missing. As the day wore on, Ken began to get more and more worried because it was extremely unusual for Janice to not return, especially when all she was planning to do was go for her run. When she had not returned as the sun began to set, Ken called the police to report Janice missing. The following morning, Ken decided to take their dog for a run to search for Janice, and as he made his way down the path, the dog suddenly stopped and wouldn't go any further as he was sniffing and pulling Ken into the brush next to them. Ultimately, this is what led to the discovery of Janice's body. And unfortunately, Ken was the one to find her. She was found in a wooded area off of the road near Blossom Music Center, and when he found her, she was bloody. Some of her clothing had been removed, and when he touched his hand to her body to check her, he found that she was cold. Ken, of course, was quick to report this to the police. Janice's body was found partially naked. She had 5 stab wounds on her. Her keys had been taken, and when the police searched for her car, they found that it was missing. Next to her body was a pair of shoelaces, which seemed to have not belonged to her, so investigators bagged them as evidence. In addition to this, they found footprints around her body that indicated that there was just one person who had attacked Janice. They could tell that one of the sets of footprints was significantly larger than Janice's, indicating that this was probably a man that they were looking for. A week later, Janice's car was found with the keys inside, abandoned in Bedford, which is a small town near Cuyahoga National Park. And then, over the next few months, 3 more women were murdered in the community, and everyone began to fear that there was a serial killer on the loose. Unlike in shows and movies, police departments and agencies are not fighting with each other over who gets the case. They want to join forces and therefore resources to help solve crimes. And while in Janice's case, they had a good amount of physical evidence, they didn't have enough resources or the technology they needed to get a hit on anything that they collected. They began to compare Janice's case to some of the other cases of the murdered women in the area and unfortunately did not find any connections between them. But then they did get one of those other women's murders solved. The downside to that was because they didn't have any connections of that one with the others, they had just a lack of information and a lack of evidence, again, because they didn't have the technology or the resources needed to connect the dots there, and the cases went cold and remained unsolved for decades. In Janice's case, though, investigators continued to look for leads and similar patterns. I am unsure whether it is lucky or unlucky that the 3 murders in the area were unrelated to Janice's, and further, Janice's case was the only Hudson Township murder that went unsolved. 37 years later, in 2021, Hudson Township Police teamed up with the Ohio Bureau of Criminal Investigation, or BCI, to re-examine the evidence in Janice's case. Then, in 2022, a connection was made. Something that investigators will try to do to help solve crimes is to try to find similar patterns in other crimes and then linking them together and pulling all of that evidence that they've collected from both or all of the cases and seeing what information that leads to and what holes can be filled with those other cases' information. We know that murder and rape are not often one-time things, and those that commit these crimes will often reuse tactics that worked previously. And this is exactly what happened to Janice. Investigators looking for comparable criminal patterns got a hit on a rape that occurred on June 16, 1987. This was only 2 months prior to Janice's murder. A teenage girl by the name of Michelle Pewitt Howard, who was only 17 years old at the time, was walking on a trail at the top of the World Park in Cuyahoga Falls. She was then grabbed off of the trail by a man who held a knife to her throat, ripped her from the trail, and then tied her up using a pair of shoelaces. He then raped her, took her car keys, her car, and her underwear, and fled the scene. When Michelle reported the attack and the rape, a swab was taken, but at the time, there wasn't a DNA database to be able to run that collected specimen and therefore the DNA through to try to get a match. But she survived her attack, and she was able to provide authorities with a description that turned into a composite sketch of the attacker. 37 years later, the case finally got solved. After the DNA was linked to DNA found with Janice's body, authorities exhumed the body of Thomas Collier, After failing to find any living relatives and received the confirmation they needed to confirm that Thomas was in fact the person who killed Janice that fateful August day, and he's the same man who raped Michelle that same June. And Thomas had quite a record. He was born in Cleveland in 1926 and had several prior rapes, burglaries, and stabbings on his rap sheet in the state of Ohio, Arizona, Nevada, California, Louisiana, and Michigan. The following information is not a complete list of his record. He was arrested for the first time at 17 years old in 1943. In 1959, he was sentenced to prison for grand larceny. In 1961 and in 1972, he was convicted of burglary and malicious entry, which, as you can already see, the pattern is escalating. His behavior is getting more aggressive and more bold, and we can already see that the punishments are not doing what it needs to do to stop this from moving any farther. In 1976, Thomas was convicted of rape, stabbing, and burglary, in which he was in prison until he was released in 1985. Just to be clear, he raped and stabbed a woman, was sentenced to 82 years in prison, and then paroled after 9 years so that way he could go out and do it again. In 1987, Thomas is suspected of breaking and entering into Vicki Miller Cobb's home and then raping her. But the evidence of her case was destroyed after 6 years because that was the limit for how long the statute of limitations in Ohio was for a rape case. Meaning that after 6 years, attackers could no longer be charged for their crimes, and the evidence therefore was deemed no longer necessary, and so it was destroyed. That, at least in Ohio, has changed from 6 years to 25 years, and in my opinion, that statute really should not have a limitation on it, but I don't make the rules. We know that Thomas was in Arizona starting in 1992, where he was again arrested. But then in 1998, he was arrested for drug trafficking in California. In 2001, he was released from being in jail yet again, and he then died in Yuma, Arizona on July 5th, 2009 because of respiratory failure, and he was 83 years old. The phrase "time heals all wounds" implies that with time, the hurt will lessen and the desire for answers will accept the silence. But that is just not the case. Time does not heal all wounds. Time does not even heal many wounds. But still, those who hope and pray to know what happened to the people they cared about hang on to hope as they are filled with despair. Ken had to live with Janice's legacy, and while there is no answer that will bring ease or happiness to the families of victims of violent attacks, Ken has stated that he hopes other departments look into other unsolved cases with similarities, and this helps to bring answers to families who are long overdue. The answers, while hard in their own way, are deserved by those missing their mothers, fathers, sisters, and brothers, sons and daughters, friends and family. They deserve to have answers and to close that door of wondering forever. Thank you for listening. You may be hearing my dogs barking in the background. Thank you for listening. Please take a moment to rate or review this podcast anywhere that you listen, and be sure to share it with your friends. Until next time, bye. What is life without close calls with disaster? Thank you for listening. Don't forget to follow the podcast to be the first to hear the now weekly episodes. Join our subscription on Patreon, Apple, or Spotify today and immerse yourself in the haunting beauty of the great outdoors. For around $4 a month, you'll get exclusive access to the first episode of each month and early access to all other episodes, showcasing the morbid and mysterious side of nature. Please reach out with story requests, and if you have your own story, please email tragedywithAview@gmail.com for a chance to have your story featured on a later episode. Again, thanks for listening. We'll see you next time.